They laughed at me like I was the punchline of a cruel joke. My son's new wife lifted her wine glass, gestured toward me, and said, "This is the burden we'll have to tolerate." And everyone, her parents, her friends, even the servants pretending not to listen, laughed. Everyone except her father, who moments later would realize who I truly was. That was the night I stopped being silent. That was the night I decided no one would ever write my worth again. Hello everyone, my name is Nora Langford. Before I tell you how everything unfolded, let me ask, where are you watching from tonight? Because what I'm about to share could happen anywhere, in any family where love gets twisted by pride. It started on a Saturday evening that smelled of jasmine and rain. The Hallbergs' mansion was a cathedral of glass and gold, the kind of place that tries to make you feel small before you even step inside. I remember standing at their front door, clutching the gift I'd brought, handmade ceramic bowls wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. Simple, personal, the kind of thing I'd always loved to give. But the moment Lily, my son Daniel's new wife, saw the package, her lips curved in polite pity. "Oh, how quaint," she said softly, turning to her mother. "Isn't that sweet?" Her mother, perfectly coiffed, smiled without warmth. "It's lovely, dear. Homemade things always have character." That word, character, rolled off her tongue like something distasteful. Daniel stood beside her, adjusting his tie, pretending not to notice the exchange. I caught his eye for a moment, hoping for a sign of reassurance, but he only looked away, as if embarrassed that I'd brought something so ordinary into their opulent world. Dinner was held in a room that could fit my entire house twice over. A chandelier hung above us, dripping with crystal tears. The table gleamed under its light. Silver cutlery, porcelain plates, and a single white rose at each setting. I sat at the far end, opposite Mr. Hallberg, the patriarch. His presence filled the room more than the decor did. He asked few questions, preferring to discuss business deals and family investments. I listened quietly, smiling when appropriate, sipping my water instead of wine. At first, the conversation was tolerable. Weather, travel, polite curiosity about my background. But then, somewhere between the second course and dessert, the tone began to shift. "So, Nora," Lily's mother began, "Daniel tells us you used to be an accountant?" "Still am, technically," I said with a smile. "Numbers have a funny way of following you." "Oh, that's nice," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I suppose that's steady work." Her husband chuckled. "Steady, yes, but not quite the empire-building type, eh?" Laughter rippled around the table. Daniel forced a smile. "Mom's always been hard-working," he said softly, but it sounded more like an apology than praise. And then came Lily's words, the ones that sliced straight through me. She turned to her family, swirling her wine as if she were announcing a toast. "Well," she said, her tone light and amused, "this is the burden we'll have to tolerate." Her manicured hand gestured toward me. For a moment, no one moved. Then laughter erupted, polite at first, then genuine. The sound filled the air, loud and hollow. I felt my cheeks flush, my hands trembling in my lap. Daniel looked down at his plate. Not one word, not one defense. I wanted to speak, to tell them that everything they mocked had once kept their son alive, clothed, educated, that the burden they laughed at was the reason he could stand there in his designer suit, marrying into wealth. But I said nothing because dignity, real dignity, doesn't argue with cruelty, it outlasts it. The laughter finally died when Mr. Hallberg's phone buzzed. He excused himself and stepped into the hallway, his deep voice echoing faintly through the glass doors. 5 minutes later, he returned pale. His expression changed. He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. The confidence drained from his face. "Mrs. Langford," he said quietly, I just realized who you are." Every eye turned toward him, confusion spreading across the table. He swallowed hard. "You're the new CEO of Langford Wells, the company that just merged with ours." Silence, heavy and awkward. You could hear the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. Lily's hand froze midair. Her mother blinked. Daniel stared at me as if he'd never truly seen me before. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. "Yes," I said calmly, "that would be me." and for the first time that night, not one of them dared to laugh. That was the night everything changed, the night their mockery turned into fear, and the night I realized I could never let anyone define my worth again. After that dinner, I couldn't sleep, not because of the humiliation, but because of what it revealed. There's something about silence after laughter that stays with you. It echoes in the corners of your mind long after everyone's gone home. That night, as I sat by my bedroom window with a cup of cold tea, I thought about how we'd gotten there, how my son had grown into a man who could sit beside me while others laughed and call it peacekeeping. You don't raise a child expecting them to become cruel. You raise them hoping they'll remember your hands, the ones that held them, worked for them, prayed for them. Daniel wasn't born into wealth. We had a small apartment above a bakery on Willow Street. The smell of bread and cinnamon was our morning alarm. When my husband, Mark, died in a car accident, Daniel was only 6. I remember holding him that night, whispering, "It's going to be just us now, sweetheart, just us, but we'll be okay." And somehow, we were. I worked long hours as a junior accountant, taking on extra clients on weekends. Some nights, I'd come home so exhausted I'd fall asleep still wearing my blazer. But Daniel would tuck a blanket over me, kiss my forehead, and whisper, "Love you, Mom." That boy was my reason to wake up again. He was brilliant, curious, full of questions about everything. In high school, he got a scholarship to a private academy, a world so different from ours that it made my heart ache with pride and worry at the same time. He started coming home talking about classmates who went on ski trips to Switzerland, who had cars waiting for them after class, who never packed lunch in reused containers. At first, he'd tell me those stories with wonder, but slowly that wonder turned into comparison. "Mom," he once said, trying to sound casual, "could you maybe not pack my lunch in those plastic boxes? Other kids bring, nicer ones." I'd smiled, hiding the sting. "Of course, honey, I'll find something better." I did. But the boxes weren't the problem. The problem was shame, tiny, creeping, and invisible, the kind that grows quietly until it fills a person. When he went to college, things changed faster. He stopped calling every night. When he did, the conversations became shorter, stiffer. He studied business, joined elite clubs, and started dating women whose names sounded like perfume brands. And when he told me he'd met Lily Halberg, "She's different, Mom, sophisticated, grounded," I believed him. I wanted to. I met her once before the engagement. Tall, beautiful, with eyes that looked through people instead of at them. But Daniel loved her, and that was enough for me. Until little moments began to whisper the truth. The first time I sensed distance was at their engagement party. I wore a navy dress I'd sewn myself. It wasn't designer, but it was elegant, and it carried my memories stitched into every seam. When I arrived, Lily's friends glanced at me, smiled politely, then turned away. Daniel barely introduced me before disappearing into the crowd. Later, I overheard one of Lily's bridesmaids say, "She's sweet, but you can tell she's not our kind." Our kind. I'd never realized kindness had categories until that night. As their wedding approached, I kept hoping things would soften, but they didn't. Every time I tried to help, whether it was offering to bake cookies for the rehearsal dinner or suggesting a family photo session, Lily would smile that practice smile and say, "Oh, that's thoughtful, Nora, but we've got it handled." Her we always excluded me. Even Daniel began to mimic that tone, a quiet, polished politeness that sounded like distance-wearing manners. Once I asked him if Lily's family knew about me being promoted at work. He shrugged. "They know you work," he said, "but they don't really get the whole finance world. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal." After 25 years of building myself from a cubicle to a boardroom, my son thought it wasn't a big deal. But love makes you swallow a lot of pride. So when the invitation came for dinner at the Halbergs mansion, I told myself it was progress, that maybe, finally, we were building a bridge. I ironed my best dress, wrapped the ceramic bowls I'd made with my own hands, and told myself, this is the night they'll see who I am. And in a way, they did, just not the way I imagined. That dinner taught me something I wish I'd never had to learn. Sometimes the people you raise with love will let others teach them how to look down on you. But it also taught me something else. When respect leaves the room, dignity has to take its place. And that's exactly what I decided to do. There's a reason I call it the Dinner of Masks. Because that night, everyone wore one politeness stretched like thin silk over contempt. And me, I wore mine too. The quiet smile of a mother who refuses to break in front of strangers. The Hallbergs' mansion glowed like a palace when I arrived. 2 servants opened the double doors as though welcoming royalty, and yet the moment I stepped inside, I felt more like an intruder. The marble floors gleamed under my feet, the air heavy with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume. Every inch of the place whispered, "You don't belong here." Lily floated toward me in a champagne-colored dress that looked more like liquid light than fabric. She kissed my cheek lightly, her lips cool. "Nora," she said, her voice sweet but sharp. "So glad you could make it." Behind her, Daniel smiled that nervous, careful smile I'd begun to recognize, the kind that asked me not to embarrass him. I handed her the gift, the ceramic bowls I'd made myself, glazed in soft blue. She turned them in her hands as though unsure what they were. "Oh," she said. "Handmade?" Her mother leaned over. "How lovely." Her tone stretched the word so thin it almost broke. Then came that silence, the one that swallows kindness whole. Dinner began in a dining room that could have doubled as an art gallery. The table was long enough to need its own zip code. Lily's father, Richard Hallberg, sat at the head, commanding attention without even trying. He was a man who'd been obeyed his whole life, and you could see it in the way he moved. Slow, deliberate, entitled. Daniel sat beside him, like a student eager to please his teacher. I was placed near the other end, next to Lily's aunt, a woman who smelled of mint and judgment. Conversation was light at first. Vacations, charities, mutual acquaintances. I smiled, answered when spoken to, and let their laughter ripple past me. They spoke about art exhibitions in Paris and a polo event in Argentina, while I thought about the spreadsheets and late nights that had paid for my son's tuition. At one point, Lily's mother asked, "So Nora, what do you do with yourself these days?" I smiled. "I'm still in finance. It keeps me busy." "Oh, finance. How interesting," she said with the faintest wince. "My husband dabbles in that sort of thing too, though, of course, on a global scale." Richard Hallberg chuckled, patting her hand. "Darling, everyone dabbles these days. The real work is knowing when to let the experts handle it." I caught Daniel's eyes. He looked away. That hurt more than the words. Then came the main course, and with it, the unraveling. Wine flowed, laughter grew louder, and the air thickened with arrogance. Lily was radiant in the way people are when they believe they're winning a performance. "So, Mother," she said lightly, "aren't we lucky? We have a new addition to the family, one we'll just have to tolerate." Her eyes glimmered as she gestured toward me. "The burden we'll have to tolerate," she added, and took a sip of her wine. The laughter that followed felt endless. Soft chuckles at first, then a wave of mirth rolling down the table's shoulders, shaking, eyes glancing in my direction. Now, I remember the weight of my fork in my hand, the soft tremor in my wrist. I remember thinking, if I move, I'll shatter. But I didn't. I sat still and let the laughter echo, because sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's restraint sharpened into steel. Richard's phone rang then, cutting through the noise. He excused himself with a polite nod, stepping out into the hallway. The laughter slowly faded. Conversation turned to awkward small talk, but the air had changed colder now, heavy with what had just been said. When he returned, everything shifted. The man who'd earlier barely acknowledged my existence looked suddenly uneasy. He stood behind his chair, staring at me. "Mrs. Langford," he said slowly, "I just received a call from our board." He paused, his eyes narrowing as if to confirm a suspicion. "You're Nora Langford, of Langford Wells?" "Yes," I said, meeting his gaze. The room froze. The same merger his company had been boasting about for weeks, the one that was about to redefine his empire, had placed me at its helm. I wasn't just Daniel's mother, I was his new CEO. The silence was electric. Lily's smile faltered. Her mother's hand gripped her wine glass too tightly. And Daniel, my son, looked as though he'd just realized the full weight of his own silence. "Forgive me," Richard said, clearing his throat. "I wasn't aware. We were in such distinguished company." "Neither was I said softly, and folded my napkin. For a moment, no one breathed. Then I stood. "Thank you for dinner," I said. "It's been enlightening." I walked out to the sound of nothing. Not laughter, not apology, just the hush that follows realization. As I stepped into the cool night air, I felt something strange. Not victory, not revenge, just peace. Because in that moment, I understood something my years in business had taught me. The people who laugh at you today will often end up depending on you tomorrow. When I got home that night, I didn't cry. I thought I would, but tears felt too small for what had just happened. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, the same one Daniel and I used to do his homework on, and just breathed. The laughter still echoed faintly in my ears, but so did his father's voice, gentle, steady, always telling me, let them underestimate you. It's the sweetest kind of advantage. He'd been right. They saw a burden that night, but what they didn't see, what they couldn't see, was the woman I'd become while they were busy laughing. I hadn't planned to end up in the corporate world. After Mark died, I took the first stable job I could find, a junior accounting position at a mid-size firm. At first, it was survival, pay the rent, keep the lights on. But survival has a strange way of sharpening your instincts. I learned to read balance sheets like maps, tracing not just numbers, but motives. I understood how fear hides in budgets and how greed disguises itself in forecasts. By the time most people saw a problem, I'd already found the pattern beneath it. It wasn't ambition that drove me at first. It was necessity. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was good at this. And not just good, exceptional. In a world where power liked to wear expensive suits and deep voices, I learned to speak in results. I didn't play office politics. I played the long game. When the company merged with Langford Wells, they offered me a seat at the boardroom table. And when the CEO retired, I took the chair not through charm or favors, but through years of competence no one could deny. I never bragged about it. Not to my friends, not to my son, especially not to Daniel. He always thought of me as the woman who made coffee in a chipped mug and wore cardigans from last winter's sale. I let him think that. Maybe I wanted to protect him from the pressure I carried. Maybe, deep down, I just wanted to remain mom, not a figure of authority. But that night, at the Hallbergs' table, watching him shrink into silence while others mocked me, I realized how much I'd hidden. Not just from him, but from myself. The Monday after that dinner, I walked into my office with new clarity. My name was etched on the frosted glass door, Nora Langford, Chief Executive Officer. For the first time, that title didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. The staff greeted me with respect, some even with admiration, because they knew my story, the real one. They knew I'd started where most of them were sitting now. They knew what it meant to claw your way up without ever compromising your integrity. And yet, the irony was almost poetic. The same people who'd laughed at me for being ordinary were now about to depend on my signature to keep their empire afloat. That week, I had 3 meetings with Richard Hallberg. The first was stiff and formal. He kept glancing at me like he was still trying to reconcile what he'd seen at dinner with who sat across from him now. The second meeting was different, respectful, bordering on reverent. By the third, he'd stopped calling me Mrs. Langford and started saying, "Nora, what do you recommend?" Funny, isn't it? Respect sounds so much sweeter when it comes late. One afternoon, while reviewing merger documents, Richard paused and said, "You know, I owe you an apology for my family's behavior." I looked up, smiled faintly. "No apology necessary. I've learned that class isn't measured by wealth." He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "You're right." There was something almost human in his eyes, then a flicker of humility, or maybe regret. I didn't need either. I just needed him to know I'd seen through them all and survived it. But Daniel, he didn't call for days after that dinner. I told myself he was busy, but deep down I knew he was ashamed not of them but of himself. And maybe that was justice, in its quietest form. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't plan a speech. I didn't want to humiliate anyone. Because power without grace is just another kind of cruelty. What I wanted, what I needed, was something far simpler. To live in the truth of who I was, without apology. They thought they were mocking a burden. But I was the backbone they didn't know they'd need. That realization changed me. Not into someone harder, but someone clearer. I understood now that being underestimated isn't an insult. It's a mirror showing you exactly how much people can't see. And the next time I faced Daniel, I knew the conversation wouldn't be about what they did to me. It would be about what he allowed them to do. The following week felt like stepping into a different world, one where silence carried more weight than words ever could. The Hallbergs' offices sat on the 23rd floor of a glass tower downtown, all chrome and confidence. I'd walked through those same doors hundreds of times before, but never quite like that morning, never as the woman they now knew me to be. When I arrived, the receptionist nearly tripped over her words. "Good morning, Miss Langford. Mrs. I smiled gently. Nora is fine." Her cheeks flushed pink. The whisper of recognition followed me down the corridor like perfume. I could feel it, the quick glances, the hushed voices. People who, just days ago, saw me as a background figure were suddenly sitting straighter, adjusting their tones, as if respect could erase memory. When I entered the boardroom, Richard Hallberg was already standing. He gestured for me to sit at the head of the table, the very spot he used to claim without question. "Mrs. Langford," he began, his voice low, "I wanted to extend my apologies again for the behavior of my family. It was unforgivable." I looked at him for a long moment. "I appreciate that, Richard," I said softly, "but forgiveness isn't something you earn through apology. It's something you prove through conduct." He nodded, the humility genuine this time. Business resumed, and for the next hour we spoke numbers, projections, and strategy. Two professionals bound by necessity, not history. And though the meeting went well, every sentence I spoke felt double-edged calm on the surface, yet echoing with all the things left unsaid. By the afternoon, my phone buzzed. "Daniel?" The screen lit up with his name, and for a moment my heart stilled. I let it ring once, twice, before answering. "Mom?" His voice was quiet, uncertain. "Yes, Daniel. Can I come by your office?" A pause. "If you think you're ready to have a real conversation." He arrived 20 minutes later, looking more like a boy than a man. His tie was crooked, his eyes restless. He closed the door behind him, standing awkwardly near the edge of my desk, as if unsure whether to sit or kneel. "Mom," he began, "I didn't know. I swear I had no idea." I held up a hand. "Stop, this isn't about what you didn't know, Daniel. It's about what you didn't do." His eyes darted to the floor. "I didn't mean for it to go that way. I was just trying to keep the peace." "Peace?" I repeated softly. "Is that what you call it? Sitting silently while your wife called your mother a burden?" He flinched, his voice breaking. "I was embarrassed, okay? You don't understand how they are." I stood then, not out of anger but out of disbelief. "Oh, I understand perfectly. I just didn't realize my son had learned to measure worth by the tone of a dinner invitation." He tried to speak, but I didn't let him. I had swallowed enough words for both of us over the years. "Do you know what it took for me to get here, Daniel? The nights I went to bed hungry so you could have better lunches, the days I walked to work in the rain because I couldn't afford the bus fare, and the years I spent building a name in a world that never once made it easy." He looked up then, eyes brimming with guilt. "I do, Mom. I thought I could make things easier for you by keeping you out of it. I didn't want them to treat you like less," I finished. "They did, because you let them." Silence filled the room, heavy, suffocating. And then, softly, I said the words that had been waiting inside me for years. "You were never supposed to protect me from their judgment, Daniel. You were supposed to stand with me through it." He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders trembling. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I messed up so badly." I wanted to reach out and comfort him, but something in me held still. Because love without accountability isn't love, it's permission. After a long pause, I said quietly, "Daniel, you'll have to decide what kind of man you want to be, the one who hides behind silence, or the one who learns from it. I can forgive, but I won't forget." He nodded slowly, tears glistening in his eyes. "I don't deserve you." I gave a faint smile. "Maybe not yet, but you could try to." He left soon after, and as the door closed behind him, I sat back down at my desk. The city stretched beyond my window, endless glass and motion, and for the first time in a long time, I felt unshaken. Power can silence cruelty, yes, but it can't heal betrayal. That kind of healing only begins when truth finally has the courage to speak, and mine just had. A week after that confrontation with Daniel, I received an invitation. It came in the form of a cream-colored envelope hand-delivered to my office. Inside, embossed gold letters read, Family dinner, Hallberg residence, 7 p.m. A chance to make amends. For a moment, I stared at the paper, my pulse still. It wasn't the words that unsettled me. It was the timing. Richard was too careful, too image-conscious to leave this apology to chance. Still, I went. Not because I needed their remorse, but because I wanted closure on my own terms. The mansion looked different that evening. Less laughter, fewer lights, more tension hiding beneath polite smiles. Richard greeted me at the door, his posture deliberate, hands clasped behind his back, eyes calculating but kind. "Mrs. Langford," he said, his voice firm yet oddly tender. "Thank you for coming. We wanted to clear the air." I glanced past him to where his daughter, my daughter-in-law, stood beside Daniel. She wore a polished smile, but her eyes were restless. Daniel looked like a man torn between guilt and fear. I stepped inside. The same dining table that once witnessed my humiliation now gleamed under a chandelier, its reflection cold and bright. I sat where I had before, not out of nostalgia, but defiance. Dinner began in careful silence. Richard lifted his glass. "To new beginnings," he said, "and to the humility that keeps us human." The others murmured agreement, but their eyes flickered toward me, waiting to see how I'd respond. I set my fork down. "New beginnings," I repeated softly. "Only matter if the old wounds stop bleeding." Richard inclined his head slightly. "You're right. My family's behavior that night was disgraceful. We were thoughtless. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive us." His daughter Isla chimed in then, her tone dripping with rehearsed contrition. "I'm so embarrassed about what I said," she began, pressing a manicured hand to her chest. "I didn't mean to offend you, Mrs. Langford. I was nervous and, well, I thought it was just a harmless joke." A joke. The word rang sharp in the air like glass breaking under pressure. I looked at her steadily. "You called me a burden, Isla. You pointed at me as if I were something to tolerate, not someone to know. Tell me, what exactly was the punchline?" Her smile faltered. I didn't mean—" Richard interrupted quickly, his tone diplomatic. "Let's not rehash the unpleasant details. The important thing is that we all learn and move forward, yes?" But that's when I realized this wasn't an apology. It was damage control. A performance to soothe reputations, not reconcile hearts. And Daniel, my son, sat through it, watching, silent once more. I felt the old ache return, but beneath it, something stronger, resolve. I took a slow sip of water, then set my glass down deliberately. "Richard, your family doesn't need my forgiveness," I said. "What you need is awareness, because apologies without accountability are just another form of pride." He looked startled, then defensive. "With respect, Mrs. Langford, I think we've shown considerable humility inviting you here." A humorless smile touched my lips. "No, Mr. Hallberg, you've shown strategy. There's a difference." I stood, my chair sliding back with a sound that seemed to echo longer than it should have. For years, I've taught others that integrity isn't something you speak. It's something you show when no one's watching. Tonight, I see that lesson still has students. Daniel's voice broke in, desperate. "Mom, please don't leave like this." I turned to him, meeting his eyes, the same brown eyes that used to look up at me from a childhood bed, waiting for bedtime stories. "I'm not leaving, Daniel," I said softly. "I'm just stepping back to let you decide which world you belong to." And then I walked out. Outside, the night air was cool and clean, the kind of cold that wakes you. I stood under the tall gates of the Hallberg estate, breathing deeply. For the first time in months, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel angry. I just felt done. Because peace, I realized, doesn't always come from fixing what broke. Sometimes it comes from walking away and letting the silence finish the sentence for you. The next morning, I wrote my resignation letter. Not from the company, but from their game. I still led. I still commanded respect. But I did it on my terms. Quietly, steadily, without the need to prove myself to anyone again. Some truths, I learned, don't need to be shouted. They just need to be lived. 6 months passed. Seasons changed. And with them, so did I. My days found a new rhythm. Calm, steady, deliberate. I'd taken a step back from the noise of boardrooms and headlines. The world that once defined my worth no longer dictated it. I still advised the company, yes, but from a distance, consulting, mentoring, building from the quiet. The freedom felt strange at first, like learning to breathe again after years of shallow air. but in that stillness I began to rediscover something I'd forgotten long ago, myself. One afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea and the sunlight spilling through the window like soft gold. My phone buzzed. Daniel. We hadn't spoken much since that dinner, polite texts. The occasional update, I hadn't expected him to reach out beyond that. Mom, his message read, "Can I come by? I have something I need to tell you." There was no hesitation in me this time. "Yes," I replied. "Come." When he arrived, I noticed how different he looked, not in clothes or posture, but in presence. He seemed quieter, more grounded. The nervous energy that once clung to him like static was gone. He held a small envelope in his hand. "Before I say anything," he began, his voice steady but soft, "I want you to know, I left the Hallberg Company." My breath caught. "Daniel?" He nodded quickly. "It wasn't right, Mom. After that night, I kept pretending everything was fine, but it wasn't. I realized I'd built my whole life around being accepted by people who never respected what made me who I am. What made you who you are." I stayed silent, letting him speak. He continued. "I started my own firm. Small, just 3 of us. But I wanted to build something honest where people earn their place, not inherit it. And I used everything you taught me, the way you led, the way you treated people." He placed the envelope on the table between us. Inside was a simple card. Langford Company, consulting founder, Daniel Langford. For a moment I couldn't speak. My throat tightened. He reached across the table, his hand trembling slightly. "I'm sorry it took me so long to understand," he said. "I wanted to be like them when all I ever needed was to be like you." Tears welled before I could stop them. It wasn't grand, it wasn't dramatic, just 2 people in a kitchen finally finding their way back to truth. Weeks later, I attended the opening of his small firm. No chandeliers, no fanfare, just warmth. The walls were lined with photographs of mentors, community projects, and one simple framed quote on the wall: "Worth isn't inherited, it's earned through grace." He told me he'd chosen it after rereading the leadership notes I'd written years ago, the ones he'd once ignored. And then, as clients began to arrive, I noticed someone I hadn't expected to see. Richard Hallberg. He approached me slowly, humility written across his once proud face. "Nora," he said quietly, "I came to congratulate your son. He's impressive. I can see where he gets it." There was no arrogance left in him, just the weight of understanding. I nodded politely. "Thank you, Richard. I hope your family is well." He sighed. "They're learning. Some lessons take longer than others." And in that moment, I realized revenge had never been the point. It was restoration, not of reputation, but of self-respect. That night, I sat by my window watching the city lights pulse like distant stars. For years, I'd mistaken tolerance for grace, silence for strength. But true grace, I now knew, wasn't quiet endurance. It was the courage to walk away without bitterness and still wish peace on those who wronged you. I thought back to that dinner table, the laughter, the sting, the humiliation, and then to Richard's face when he realized who I was. If I'd wanted, I could have used that moment to destroy them. Instead, I used it to rebuild me, and that has made all the difference. To anyone listening, maybe you've been there too, laughed at, dismissed, treated like a burden in a room you helped build. Let them laugh, let them underestimate you, because when the truth of who you are finally stands in the light, it doesn't need to shout, it simply is. I looked out at the skyline one last time that night and smiled. "I am not a burden," I whispered to the glass. "I am the foundation they stand on." And somewhere deep inside, I felt it, the quiet, steady heartbeat of peace. That was the moment I knew my story had come full circle. And this time, I was the one writing the ending.